Today's occurrence happens in a cave in Kentucky. When three friends went on what was supposed to be a one-day adventure, they were excited to be exploring an attraction that was described as treacherous for beginners. But by the end of the trip, one of the friends would be trapped and completely stuck between several rocks. I'm Tatiana Bunch, and this is the story of William Coughlin. On Friday, May 28th, William, who went by Bill, and his two friends, Jim Jacala and Kevin Feely, left for a weekend trip. It was Memorial Day weekend, and they traveled from Oak Forest, Illinois, to Cave City, Kentucky. They were all in their 20s, looking for an adventure, and while they were in Cave City, they had a great time exploring and enjoying the long holiday weekend. Today, there are amusement parks, museums, and lots of tourist attractions. While they were exploring the attractions, they discovered a brochure for Buzzards Roost Cave, offering two kinds of tours. There's the safe, scenic, historic tour, and the riskier, wild cave tour. Both open to the public and both guided. The historic tour took you to areas in the cave that were easy to navigate and walk through. The second tour was the Wild Cave Tour, and it was made for the more daring visitors. A guide would take you to explore the untouched areas of the cave, and you had to twist, crawl, and squeeze through lower passages. The trio planned to check it out during their weekend trip. Friday and Saturday were filled with exploring Cave City and enjoying the public and private caves. The public caves were fun, but the private ones were prettier, so Saturday night they went to bed excited for their plans the next day. On Sunday, May 30th, 1993, Bill, Jim, and Kevin decided to try out Buzzards Roost Cave. They wanted to try the historic tour first, and like with most things that have risks, to do that tour they had to sign a liability release form. They all signed their names on the same liability form, saying if anything happened during their time at the cave, they would not take legal action against the owners or any party related to the cave. But before they started on the historic tour, Kevin changed his mind and backed out. So Bill and Jim continued the tour without him. Cave manager Dave Hardin led the tour. Bill and Jim had a good time doing the historic tour and felt like they could do the more challenging tour too. So they decided to try the Wild Cave Tour later that afternoon. For the Wild Cave Tour, 4 other people joined Bill and Jim, and they all paid David to guide that one too. Everyone again signed a liability form to do the Wild Cave Tour starting at 4:30 p.m. David handed out 2 flashlights for the group to share and briefed everyone. He told them that he would lead the tour and that every person after him should go through the cave the exact same way as the person in front of them did. So if the person in front of you crawled a specific way, then you should follow them crawling the same way. Kind of like the game Follow the Leader. Now the Wild Tour had a different entrance than the historic tour. For this one, they had to start by going through a narrow crawlway. After crawling through tight passages for a while, they went up a narrow, tight slot. And they met the first challenge, a ladder. The first ladder was a 30-foot cable ladder with wooden rungs. It hung over a 25-foot deep pit. After the group went down the ladder, they crawled a bit more before reaching a second ladder. The second ladder was shorter, but harder to navigate because it hung over protruding rocks. It was around 15 to 20 feet, and it hung over a 42-foot deep pit. But because of how rocks pushed into it, it was hard for anyone to have a proper grip while climbing. But the group pressed on, climbing down the second ladder. By the way, both ladders were homemade and permanently installed in the cave. After more crawling, they reached an area called the Big Room. David declared the official tour over and gave them free rein to explore nearby passages. They explored for a couple of hours before David got everyone together around 7 o'clock and led the way back. Once they made it back to the second ladder, David said they were behind schedule and that he needed to check in on the surface. So he left to make a phone call, and this is where reports differ. Some reports say David told the group that if they weren't out in 45 minutes, he would come back to get them. And other reports say that David left to make a phone call, and after he didn't come back 30 to 45 minutes later, the group tried to leave on their own. So either way, 45 minutes goes by and the tour guide is nowhere to be found. The group starts climbing the second ladder and 2 of them manage to make it up. But then 27-year-old Bill tried to climb it. He couldn't get past the rock sticking out halfway up. So he climbed back down and let 2 more people in the caving group climb up instead. Then Bill tried again. And again, he couldn't get past the rock halfway up. At this point, Jim asked 2 people that had already climbed up to keep going so they could leave and find David. Jim and Bill waited a while, but with no sign of David, Bill tried to climb the ladder again. But this time, he slipped and fell. Bill's hand lost its grip at the rock and hit his back on a ledge on the way down. He fell 30 feet before landing on his head at the bottom. He did not have a helmet on. No one in the group did, since the tour didn't provide one for them. So when Bill landed head first on the rocks, he started bleeding immediately and heavily from a 2-inch cut on his scalp. Jim told the other 2 in the group, who were still waiting at the top, to leave and get help. They left and found David, who came back. But David returned without a medical kit, and he didn't call for help. It was decided that Bill could get out of the cave on his own, so the remaining cavers pushed and pulled him up the pit. I can only speculate how that was decided, considering Bill was slipping in and out of consciousness after hitting his head. But after that, they made their way to the first ladder, the 25-foot one. They wrapped rope around him again and helped him up. Now after that was an area that they were supposed to crawl through. When Bill tried to go down the V-floored slot head first, he got stuck. He had one hand between his stomach and the rock, and the other hand was pinned behind his back. At this point, there was 1 caver in front of him, and 3 on the other side, close to the entrance. The 3 on the entrance side left to get the owner of the cave. David and the owner didn't want to panic the town if there wasn't a reason to do so, and they wanted to try and get Bill out themselves. Now, Bill was the largest person in the group. At 27 years old, he's 6 foot 2 inches tall and weighs 230 pounds. So he's a pretty big guy to be navigating this area of the cave. And the size difference between him and everyone else on top of that made things more difficult. It wouldn't be until 10:30 that night, 3 hours after Bill got stuck, that the 3 cavers that left the cave earlier managed to contact the Cave City Volunteer Fire Department. Other rescuers were also alerted to go help free Bill, and they worked throughout the night. Now, Buzzards Roost Cave gets pretty chilly for a Kentucky cave, and temperatures inside were around 44 degrees Fahrenheit, or 6.5 degrees Celsius. As the fire department and other cavers worked to free Bill, he started becoming hypothermic and stopped responding to questions after 1 a.m. They tried several methods to free Bill, including making the hole that he was in bigger, but the area was too unstable to do it without putting everyone in more danger. So they did what they could and had 1 very small caver squeeze over Bill and work from inside where he was trapped. They dressed the cut on Bill's head and gave him oxygen. Now, Bill wasn't an experienced caver. In fact, he was very inexperienced, but when he was younger, he loved camping and gardening. Bill loved the feral animals at the zoo and in the forest preserves. It's why 2 years before this trip to Cave City, he started working with the Federal Environmental Protection Agency. Bill wanted to protect the environment. He loved nature and was an amateur photographer too. Jim and Bill grew up together after meeting in Boy Scouts. And this trip was something they were both so excited for because it was their first organized caving trip. They were both outdoorsy types and had been in caves before, but nothing like this. And after being trapped for 7 hours, Bill's pulse was lost around 5 o'clock that morning. The Kentucky Speleofest was happening at Smith's Grove nearby, so around 6:30 a.m., they managed to get a crew of 4 dozen small cavers attending the event to come out and try and get Bill's remains out of the cave. He was officially pronounced dead at 7 o'clock Monday morning. It was a very difficult process, and removing Bill took until almost 1 in the afternoon to get him out. Bill was inside Buzzards Roost Cave for 17 hours. The Kentucky medical examiner determined the cause of death was positional asphyxia. Bill's weight on his diaphragm and chest prevented him from breathing, in the head-down position he was in. Around 200 paramedics, firefighters, cave explorers, and mappers worked to get Bill out. Now, there were so many red flags in everything I just told you, and because of how the situation happened and how everything seemed fine to these people who were not familiar with caving, until it was very clearly not fine anymore, I'm going to break it down. First thing, the cavers on the tour were not provided helmets. They should have had helmets. The flashlights they were given were handheld, and they weren't given enough lights to begin with. So with only having handheld flashlights, when you're climbing on the ladder, you can't hold the light yourself. The only lighting you will have is from someone above or below lighting the way for you. When you're climbing a cable ladder, you should be belayed. So the person climbing should be attached to a rope that someone else is holding or using a belay device to control the rope. The rope should be tight enough that if you're climbing and slip, you don't swing out or free fall, but not so tight that it's hard to climb. So already there's like 3 major things that David failed to do. Then there's the fact that Bill was wearing tennis shoes. If he was wearing boots like everyone on the tour should have been, he would have had an easier time climbing the ladder. He also probably would have had a better grip if he was wearing gloves, considering the cold temperatures of the cave. If he had gloves on, his hands would have been warm enough to take them off to climb and have a good grip. But since it was cold, his hands probably had a hard time grabbing the already difficult to climb ladder. And speaking of the temperatures, a 44 degrees cave puts you in serious risk of hypothermia and requires thermal underwear and caving suits. All the cavers on the tour were in light casual clothing. Now, for David's actions specifically, he left the tourists on their own when they were most tired and at higher risk of having an accident. Then, after Bill's fall, they chose to exit the cave instead of calling for rescue. If they had called for rescue when Bill fell, it's almost certain he would have made it out alive. And once they got up the ladders and he had to go through the slot where he got stuck, David is the one who told him to go in head first in the way that he did. Now, even though they were told that the tour was for the more daring adventurers, the reality is, with cave tours, pretty much everyone going on them is not experienced. They don't know enough to recognize the true level of danger, how exhausted they actually are, if the right techniques are being done, and if the equipment they're using is appropriate. You don't know what you don't know. So really, everyone should have been treated as if it was the first cave they had ever stepped into and monitored closely. But the truth is, it was when Bill got stuck with his head down that it was over. Apparently the methods they were using to move Bill, dragging him along with the rope, pushing and pulling him, it's not how someone still alive should be moved because it causes more injury. He would have gotten out if rescuers were called immediately and David and the owner didn't try to handle things in-house. And Bill's family felt the same because they sued David and the owner, Gordon Hall. Although part of it was to get legislation changed to protect people in the future. Now, David and Gordon argued in court that Bill had signed away his rights to sue for negligence by signing the waiver. But here's the thing. Kentucky law is kind of against these waivers, especially when the parties involved don't have equal bargaining powers, like in this case. Bill, an inexperienced caver, was relying heavily on the tour guide and cave operators for his safety. The court looked at whether he signed the waiver voluntarily, and if these tours are really in the public's best interest. Kentucky courts have a history of being wary of these waivers, especially when public safety is at stake. And cave tours aren't really like car or bike races, which involve a certain level of accepted risks. Given all these factors, the court decided not to grant partial summary judgment in favor of David and Gordon. Bill didn't know all the risks, and his life depended on the cave operators and their decisions, not on his own experience or judgment. That release form and advertising of the cave tour was more of an enticement than a real warning, and it failed to actually explain the dangers of the cave. The release form said, quote, "We, the undersigned, hereby accept the following special conditions, and in recognition that speleology is an inherently dangerous recreational activity, we voluntarily assume all risks, and shall indemnify and hold the owners, operators, and employees of Buzzards Roost Cave harmless from all claims, suits, actions, damages, and cost of every name and description arising out of or resulting from the privileges granted by this permit, including damages caused by or resulting from the sole or joint negligence of the owners, operators, or employees of Buzzards Roost Cave. Additionally, I accept and understand the aforementioned conditions apply to any minor we escort." End quote. So in the end, the court chose not to expand exceptions for these liability waivers. The safety of individuals like Bill took precedence. This was the first caving death like this in the area in 2 decades. Before it, Floyd Collins' entrapment happened not too far from there, and it was something everyone standing around watching Bill's rescue kept bringing up. I'll link the episode I did covering that tragedy in the show notes. Bill's sister said he died doing what he enjoyed the most, in Mother Earth. But Jim had a different tune. He said after returning to Chicago, he had nightmares of Bill falling. He said in an interview that after someone gets hurt in a cave like his best friend, bleeding at the bottom of said cave, the best help that the cave operators chose to get was themselves. He didn't think the operators were thinking with Bill's best interest in mind. Jim also said that the worst part of the accident was the 8-hour drive home. It felt like an eternity to come down with 3 people and go back with 2. There are a lot of lessons with this one, but I think one thing I should say is to never let a company handle their mistakes in-house, especially when it affects you or your loved ones. Always get outside help. Do not let them talk you out of it. Stay safe, and see you next week. All sources can be found at occurrencepod.com, which is linked in the show notes.